Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Nikki Mariana Hope on Silver Tent Radio. I'm a Silver Grove member of the Silver Tent Group for Women of 50 plus. I bring together my life wisdom and listening skills from a place of unconditional love. This encapsulates my art, flower and vibrational essences, sound healing and shamanic work. In the past, there have been times when I needed immediate help or someone to listen. So after an initial conversation, I offer my clients ongoing phone or online support, day or night, as the need rises for as long as it's required. My guest today is Raisa Ferreira, who is based in the northeast of the USA. Raisa has had a love affair with sound all of her life. When she was really little, she climbed up onto the piano stool and started to play and learned to read music before starting school. Raisa now works with people's resonance signature, using their unique core sound for healing. Today is the third in our series of chats about sound in its many different forms. Hello, Raisa. It's lovely to welcome you back.
Thank you, Nikki Mariana. It's great to be here with you.
So I'm sitting in the UK and the sun is pouring in through the window. There is frost on the ground and I could almost sing a little song or hum to myself, which to me is a lovely start to the day when the sun shines out and everything feels good.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, it's dark here. The sun hasn't come up yet. But there's, if I open the sliders, we're right near a river, so you can hear the rustling in the underbrush and everybody getting ready to wake up in the natural world. And then the birds will start singing, and that's the beginning of the day.
Yes, and that bird sound is just fabulous. And how many of us actually miss that? We forget to listen. It gets lost in the, oh, I've got to be here, I've got to do that, and rush, rush, rush. And hey, there is the most wonderful sound there. If only you stop for even 30 seconds and hear it.
Yes. A few years ago, I was driving home from work and I had to stop at the store, and I came out and the sunset was magnificent. It was so beautiful. And I knew I had to get in my car and follow the sunset.
Oh.
And I kept driving toward the sunset, and you know how it's as it's falling in, the colors change, and I started singing because the colors were sound, and I thought to myself that I had never done it before, just followed when that impetus came. And every day in life I think to myself, is today the day I'm going to follow the sunset again?
Lovely. Wow.
So the sound of that is always somewhere in my head, and I tried to write about it once, and I think that the words I wrote could never truly convey what happened, because it was like an orchestra. I would have to have an orchestra play. Yes. To be able to convey that piece. You and I have had a lot of conversation, and we were talking about the sometime frustration with trying to convey in written word whatever we're thinking or feeling, because the words on the page are, one-sided. There's the depth of them comes in their context with the words next to them, and yet each word can be many different meanings. There's I used to study Homeric Greek, and when you study the language, they really believe the language was sung, and that part of the way people understood one another was the tonality of it. There are certain Asian languages that are that way, like the sounds are so close, but there's a certain shift, and that's a different word. So they said the same, that in Greek, in Homeric Greek, the way that you knew the meaning was based on the tonality, because it was the same word with multiple meanings. And when you're reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, you're reading these words, and obviously I'm from a different culture. It's so many years later in the world, and trying to understand exactly what's being said. And I listened to a recording by a classical studies scholar, and she had been gone many years, and this was from earlier in her career, and she's singing the opening to the Iliad. And it made you want, your whole body just responded to the tones of those words. You didn't even have to understand them. But on the written page, then how many high school students go, oh, no, I gotta read the Iliad. And it's this huge adventure story, and there's love and mayhem and chaos and resolution, and there's all this excitement, but it's like, all right, I gotta read this. So part of my quest in life, as someone who does many things orally and someone who writes, is to try and find that bridge between what's in me, that's the vibration, and what I put on the page to reflect that vibration, because it is only a weak reflection. So if you hear me talk, I'm like, oh, I'm all over the place. But if you see it on paper, you're reading it in the tone that's in your head. So if there's a judgment about what's on the paper, it's in your head as you're reading. It's a filter. And we all have filters. That's just part of our experience, is our filter, everything like that. So I find it interesting to receive emails. I work in a corporate environment, very succinct, to the point emails, but sometimes I read it and I think it's a barbed email. So I have to get up, walk around, breathe, and then come back and realize that that's not the only way that those words read. And my choice becomes to respond in that initial response, which had all my filters going, or to respond from the place of who I really am, which is to share information and to be in a loving mode, because that's my choice. And there are some days I succeed and some days I don't. and I really feel the difference. And when we talk about this, somebody might be saying, what does this really have to do with sound? Well, it has to do with resonance, because thoughts have resonance. So as you take things in, and when you take something in by reading it or hearing it, it becomes filtered through you and pieces stay. So that becomes something that is interacting with your own resonance. And we talked about resonance signature and how you can shape your own world right here, this environment that you have, and how you shape that impacts the environments you interact with. So if we take something in and it's riled us in some way and we stay in that state, then we're going to respond to everything in that mode, whether we're aware of it or not, because that vibration is dominant at the time. So I would love to tell you that I'm always an even-tempered, loving person. My husband can tell you all the stories that when I'm not, and I'm sure my children can too, and the people I work with, everybody. The truth of it is I have a flash temper, and I've come to recognize it. It's part of my defense mechanism and serves me well in very abusive situations. Today, I know it for what it is, so when it crops up, I have to step away, because it means that I feel danger, I feel threatened, and I'm going to respond in survival mode rather than as the heart that I am. And honestly say it doesn't happen as much as it did in years gone by. It does still happen. And sometimes it knocks me for a loop. I mean, I can't figure out why it happened until I can step away and ease out of that mode. So I'm thinking today in this world where there's many controversies that happen and we all have emotional attachments to different things, that this is a good time for us to talk about this, to look at how written and spoken word impact us, and then how we can shape our response based on ourselves, not on anyone else, so that I am still the main mover in my life rather than a reactive participant in someone else's life. That's what I feel happens, that I become reactive and all of a sudden I'm a character in their play.
Wow. Yes. You actually covered a lot there, and there were several times I thought, now what did she mean by that? And I thought, actually, I'm so interested in what you're saying, I didn't want to stop you because you were totally in the flow then. So the Iliad, tell me about the Iliad.
I wanted to be able to read the Greek tragedies in their original language. So the closest I could get where I went to college was to take this classical language study course, which you read the Iliad and the Odyssey in their original. And you learned grammar, all that from that point of Greek. And I don't think I ever became so comfortable with it that I would just pick something up in ancient Greek and read it. But my husband was a fundamentalist minister before I had met him, and he had studied the Bible in Greek and Hebrew. So the interesting thing would be, he would mention a word and I go, oh, that has a lot of meanings. He goes, yes. So then you look at this phrase and all the different meanings and you realize that it's the whole quote in the King James Bible is sometimes taken out of context, because out of the many versions of the word, there's one that fits, the broad spectrum, and the others don't fit as well. But if you take only that phrase, it can seem that that's it. That's the definitive piece of it. And so we had a lot of interesting discussions that I never would have had with him if I hadn't known that.
That's fascinating. So the language is a bit, for a while I learned some Chinese, and I learned that the different intonation for the same word had a completely different meaning.
Yes.
And you had to get that intonation exactly right. Otherwise people would just stand there with their mouth open, wondering what on earth you were talking about, because it didn't make sense. And they didn't stop to think, well, okay, she's using that word, but does she mean something else? Because I'd got the intonation wrong, they couldn't understand it.
Right.
So if I got the intonation right, then we could maybe have a conversation. I didn't learn that much Chinese, so it was a very short conversation. But this is similar to what you're explaining about the ancient Greek.
Right. That theory that the language was sung is one theory in classical studies. Not all scholars believe that. So the languages that have the lilting sounds, we often ascribe to them lyrical song-like qualities, because just in speaking, that's how they flow. And she was saying that because of the areas that were covered by the language, when people traveled from place to place to bring news, kind of the bardic tradition, which would have been called something different, they sang it because those intonations and tonalities of the words would be recognized wherever they were. So that as they sang the word, it shaped its meaning. And it also has to do with the fact that if you sing in a certain meter, and it can be just like sing song rather than a true song, it's easier to remember. Because poets, storytellers, actors will talk about the beats. That's how you get from one point to another in the thing that you have memorized. And usually it's because there's a rhythm. It might not be a rhythm that the listener hears, but for the speaker, they have a rhythm to how they're saying it. And if they ever get thrown off that rhythm, they get out of sync and they can miss parts.
Wow.
So it does have, yeah.
Sorry, we're talking across each other. This
Ahead.
is absolutely fascinating. I've always understood that the bards were the ones who made up the songs about special events in whatever country, and then would go to gatherings and they would sing these songs.
Right. But they also sang Allah.
Right.
Brian Law was carried by the bards.
Oh. And when you sing something, it is definitely easier to remember. And you're right, the sound of the words when they're sung and the rhythm of the song gives it a whole new meaning.
Right.
Which you can't perceive from the written word unless you know the song that is intended to go with that word.
Right. So today, when we have all these devices that give us written word without sound, sometimes it's easy to have things misconstrued because we're only getting one dimension of the communication. And corporations actually have gone back and forth about what is better. There's some companies that don't want you to get up from your desk. You're to only email, and they even discourage calling. Okay. So then other companies had, because people were so email oriented, and they found a lot of things were occurring as head-on collisions that didn't need to, they started making people get together for like beginning meetings and all of these structure pieces that are meant to keep programs on task, that force these groups of people to come together in a morning meeting and then an end of day meeting, are based on the fact that the catch up needs to be verbal. You need to be able to see and hear the other person. So even people who aren't local are brought into a webinar, so that in a video webinar, so that they can participate and everybody can see them. And sometimes it's hard, especially when you're trying to communicate something that really has meaning for you, to be able to do that without your voice behind it, I think. And obviously sound is a big thing for me. I think it's because if you actually put in everything that would give that definitive piece of it, it would be a page long. It would be much longer. And that's why letter writing lets you really spread that out, right? But an email is not usually that long, or a post on a site or a text message.
And it is so easy to understand. I know with text messages, I've taken huge offense at somebody sending me a text message, and I haven't understood that they're using short words to represent a whole load of stuff that they're thinking about.
Yeah.
And I've read the short version and thought, well, okay, delete. And I've done the delete, and it hasn't been till months later that I've come across somebody who's used a similar phrase. And I said, well, what does that actually mean then? Oh, that's short form. Really? Oh, crumbs, I shouldn't have deleted that. Oh, dear. But, oh, there was something else I was going to say. Yeah, the age that we live in, with the computers that speak to us, the sat navs that speak to us, they're all having an effect on us and how we filter the sounds that they're making.
Yes. Yeah, I used to have a GPS in my car that talked to me. So I was always changing the voice. I go, I don't like that one.
Yes.
And I know that people actually spend a lot of money to get a different voice for their, system. Other than GPS, I actually, someone just gave us one of those small where you can say, oh, whatever the name of the thing is, turn on the television, blah, blah, blah. And I brought it home, and I still haven't set it up, and I keep going, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm ready for this. So we'll see what happens with that. But I don't like the computer to read my emails to me or my text messages. So I tell people, if they text me and they get the note that I'm driving, I won't look at it until I stop. So that's just the way that I
Yes.
go.
And then you can give your full attention and thought to what's been written,
Right.
or to the message that's been left.
Yeah. And a lot of times I look at the message, and if it confuses me, then I call them.
Yes. Yes. And I will do the same. And it's very easy to be confused by message.
Yes, and we forget the nuances of what our voice does, or even our facial expression. Like, you can be kidding and use words that could be harsh otherwise. And when someone's with you, they either know you're kidding or have a sense that something's going on, and they, poke about it. In text or email, anything like that, it's harder if the person doesn't know you really, really well. And usually, even when I'm writing it, I'll put a little smiley or a ha ha ha, just so it can't be,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Raisa, again, this is a subject we could talk for hours on. We've taken just over our 15 minutes, but I was so fascinated, I didn't want to stop. So where can people contact you, Raisa, if they would like to hear more about your work?
They can contact me on Facebook at Spirit Sounding, or they can reach me at spiritsounding@gmail.com.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And I love the new understanding I've gained about the Iliad and the words and the bards. That is just amazing. And look forward to talking to you next time, Raisa.
Thank you, Nikki Mariana. My pleasure, really.
Okay. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.